Admission Chat is brought to you by the Standard Application Online. Save 14 hours or more when applying to at least 3 private schools. Start saving time today at admission.org/apply.
Welcome to Admission Chat. Let's talk about standing out in the application process. Greetings, I'm Darren Worcester, and in this Admission Chat episode, you'll hear the recording from a previous admission.org webinar, originally titled From Applicant to Enrollee, Inside Private School Admissions. Our outstanding guest for this presentation was Janet Lian, the Assistant Head of School and the Director of Enrollment at the Browning School in New York City. In the presentation, Janet addresses questions on how students can stand out in the application process, offers admission tips regarding what to do and, perhaps more importantly, what not to do, and provides insight into how schools view application criteria, such as the SSAT and teacher recommendations. It's a conversation you don't want to miss, so we are offering it here on the podcast to make it more accessible. So let's jump right in.
Well, hey, everybody. Again, I'm Janet Lian, and I'm the Assistant Head of School Director of Enrollment at the Browning School. We are a K-12 all-boys school in New York City of about 400. Many of you are considering private school for the first time. Some of you may actually already be in a private school. I just want to touch on what some reasons might be for a family who wants to, explore private school. So, for example, I think a lot of people are attracted to private schools because of the student-teacher ratio. If you walk around our school, you'll see that the classes don't exceed 16 to 18 students in the classroom. There's a lot of attention given to individual students. And then the more specialized your classes get, the smaller those groups become. And so those are that's a very attractive piece for families when it comes to applying for independent schools. And I use independent and private interchangeably. Private schools often want to offer a broad program to their students. And because we want to help our students become well-balanced individuals. We want to give them a lot of exposure. We want to give them sports offerings, club offerings, competitive teams like debate and, science bowl and those sorts of things, robotics. We want to give them all of that on top of the academic experience so that they also gain leadership roles in those extracurricular activities. And so sometimes that's very attractive to families because they know that their kids are getting a lot of other things outside of the academic experience. Schools are very mission focused. Independent schools are very mission focused. So, for example, we are a boys' school. Browning is a boys' school. And so we talk a lot about the best strategies when it comes to teaching and learning with boys. We talk a lot about relational teaching and learning. We talk a lot about helping boys develop healthy notions of masculinity so that they can occupy the world in a purposeful and intentional way. Independent schools tend to be very mission oriented, and they tend to deliver a program aligned with their school's mission. I think it's no doubt about it that we have high academic standards. Independent schools, while they're not public, unlike public schools, we have accreditation processes as well, though. So we, for example, in New York, we undergo very rigorous accreditation every 10 years. And after your 10-year accreditation, there's a 5-year check-in to make sure that the school is still doing everything that we were asked to do and to maintain our standards. And then last but not least, families are often attracted to private school because of alignment with the family's values, whether that is, for us, our school values are honesty, curiosity, dignity, and purpose. And that's very resonant for some families. And so when you find a school that aligns with your family's values, that can be very attractive as well. I'll try to blow through these quick tips because I think we'll also get into it a little bit. I think folks have a lot of questions about how to apply to schools, what happens when you apply, why are there so many steps, what's going on there. And I think, if there are 5 things you can do to kind of streamline your search process or orient yourselves in a way that's going to help you get the most out of that process, I'd encourage you to do some research. There are a lot of free resources available online. If you want to do a little bit of research about a school in your area, you can look up school reviews that are available online. Consortiums, local school consortiums, private school consortiums also have a list of all the schools available, types of schools available. I know that you can do a searchable. Darren, in admission.org, is there a searchable directory? I forgot to take a look before we started.
Yes, we have a search that The design is a bit outdated. We need to work on that. It's on our to-do list, but functionally, you will find lots of schools in there and have direct links to applying to them as well from there.
Yeah, and so there are lots of resources available out there for you as you start to do your research and you compile your school list. Once you have a school list, I really recommend folks try to stay organized with lists of schools on the spreadsheet. And the reason for this is not just because I tend to be a little bit OCD about things like that. It's that but if you spend a whole year visiting a number of schools, things are going to start to blend together on the other side. So when you're kind of narrowing the list of schools that you think you want to send your child to, you're going to forget which school was it that talked about the robotics team doing this, or which school was it that this other thing happened. That you do want to make sure that you have all of those things available to you on the other end. But it's also helpful for managing appointments, making sure that you have the dates for open houses, any of the other events that a school might invite you to. I would just encourage everybody to remember that the admission process, although it feels like you're always in the hot seat, it is ultimately a two-way street. What schools are trying to do through the admission process, and that's partly why there are so many checklist items, is really to get to know your family and your child. And so, while you are evaluating a school as whether that could be the right match for your family, we're also trying to do the same, because what we want to be able to deliver on what you want us to do. If when you send your child to our school, we want to make sure that we can actually do the thing that you want us to do for your child. So this is why it's a two-way street, and that's why the application process tends to be very detailed. We'll talk a little bit later. I think one of the questions kind of talks about, what you can expect on the other end. When you get a decision, you're going to get either an accept, a wait list, or a decline. And so you want to think about what you want to do at that point of the process. But managing your expectations about what the outcomes can be very helpful. And I would just encourage you to enjoy the process as best you can. I know that it can feel stressful. You're worried about, your child's under so much scrutiny, your family's under so much scrutiny. But it's also a time of great self-discovery for your child, and you're discovering something about them as well. And also just allow yourself the room to be surprised. A school that maybe you weren't so sure about in the beginning could become one of your favorite schools by the end. So I think being open-minded is a great way to approach the process. I want you to know that schools do everything they can to help families gain access to the independent schools. And we do come with a heavy price tag in many parts of the country and the world. But we are here to try to help families afford independent school experiences. At the same time, it is an investment. And so we recognize that. And that's why we want to deliver to you the best program that we can. That's our promise to families.
Janet, I think a lot of questions that we see could be grouped around the application and process in general. I think we have a lot of folks new to the process, which is normal by all means. When they look at everything and they're looking at, all the different criteria that schools are asking for and evaluating for, I think a lot of people are wondering, is there a step in the process that's more important than the other? Or is there an evaluation criteria that gets weighted more? They're trying to navigate the waters around how to understand and the effort probably to put into all these different components.
I don't know that there's any one part that's weighted more than another. Because I think if we want families to engage and to submit all of those materials, we are going to be looking at all of those materials as closely as we can. And so I hesitate to say that one thing is more important than the next, but I can tell you a little bit about what each component of the application process, what information we get from that, right? So for example, test scores. I often get a lot of test scores questions, does your school have a cutoff? Does your school, automatically, not consider a candidate if they don't have X certain scores? And actually, that also varies school by school. So, for example, we actually dive deeper into the scores. We don't just look at the raw score. We look at, how did they perform in this section, this section of the test? What's causing a low score in this particular segment when their report cards are telling us something very different about the student, right? So we try to investigate, what might be the cause for a lower score on a test. I personally love reading the essays because I think, I want to know when you put a student, when a student has the choice, when a student is given the freedom to write about a topic that's interesting to them, what topic do they choose? What do they write about? Because that's also for us. Another component that I think we do spend a lot of time with is actually teacher recommendations. So we do look at those very closely. What we're trying to do with all the different parts of the application is to piece together our understanding of the student, how they learn, what kind of student they are, what kinds of things might the student be interested in engaging with if they came to our school. Is there a right match here? Can we support what the family hopes and wants for their child? So it's almost like detective work, and all of those pieces of the application matter. And that's why I'm hesitant to say one over the other.
So from the parents' perspective, with the groups of questions that we got, the next big one was, how can we stand out? What can we do? I think, parents look at the landscape of, there's some super competitive schools out there. There's some in the middle. We recently did a study with schools, and, one of the survey results, found that 60% of schools are receive more qualified candidates than they can accept. Good news there is, there's 40% of schools that are great schools that are open to, accepting more candidates. But if they're trying to apply into these more competitive schools, what can they do to stand out?
The most important thing you can do in the application process is to help us really understand who your child is authentically. And I think, when we some schools actually don't do a parent interview. We do a parent interview, again, because we want to understand what a family's hopes are for their child. And so that's why we do that. And it's a chance for us to talk a little bit what's important about our school too, so that we can find the match in between. The best piece of advice I can give you is something that I heard another colleague say. So this is nothing that I came up with myself. But he always recommends parents, to not be more memorable than their child in the application process. You want your child to shine, and we want your child to shine too, in the application process. But if we're sitting there, reading files at the end, and all we can remember about is the parent, that is not what you want to happen on the other end. So I think, so that's the deficit way, right? That's the things, the don'ts side. The do's part, ask questions, show that you are, you're interested for good reason in a school. Do a little bit of research so what the school's mission is, what they're trying to do, so that that conversation becomes more productive. Help us learn about your child, and that includes the good and the not great. Because ultimately, when we're in it together, when we're educating your child together, we want to make sure that everybody has their eyes wide open, and we can put in all the structures we need to ensure your child's success. The more honest you can be with us, the better. Now, I will just say one more thing, which is that, in the application process, we are most keen to understand a student's academic profile. And that's why those basic pieces are there. You may know someone who attended the school that you're applying to. Maybe someone's, you're somebody you work with. A letter of recommendation from that person that's very removed from your child and your family's experience, that's not going to really help the admission team understand your child. But having said that, I think if somebody wants to put in good word for your child because they know your child really well, that's okay. That's fine. So that's why, I don't mind it if a family says, their Taekwondo instructor really knows my child. Like, they really broke through with my child on X, Y, and Z. And so, we asked them to write a letter. Great, because that gives me another dimension of understanding. But somebody that's very removed from your family, doesn't know your child in a situation.
For us parents who have shy children, we probably have some anxiety of taking our kid, into an evaluation process like this, into an interview. This certainly is not your first rodeo. You guys, are accustomed to working with children. What are some of the things that you guys do to help the students feel comfortable and talk about themselves in the process?
Well, so certainly when we structure our process, we are thinking about those children as well. And I think that what we don't want is bias to form for students who are extroverted. We are trying to be mindful. So for example, at Browning, we generally encourage families to tour before they do the interview. So, the tour is the first part of so the child can get used to the school. They've seen the school. They have some questions. They come in and they're ready to kind of tell us, well, I saw this in the library and this is something I'm interested in. And then that way they're kind of primed for that. So I think the way that schools set up the admission visits, I think that that's one way that we try to do that. But of course, that may not happen in every school. So I think there are some things you can do as a family to help your child prepare for the interview. Help them do a little bit of research on the school, come up with some questions that they can ask when they visit. You can also, say, be prepared to talk about a class you like and why. Be prepared to talk about a teacher you really enjoy learning from and why. Some interviewers do like asking about, hey, what kind of extracurriculars do you like to do? And it's not, what I would encourage a child not to do is go in with a list, but really come up with why that's something that's interesting to them, because that's a more interesting insight. And I will tell you that the most memorable interviews I have had as an admission director have been with introverts. And often it is nothing to do with what they're learning in school, what their interests are, anything of that nature. With one boy, he saw a pen that I was holding and we started talking about the merits of different types of pen, what makes a pen a good pen. And we spent a good amount of time talking about how to decide whether a pen is a good writing instrument. That gave me so much information about that child, more than I could have gotten if he told me about his favorite book.
So if we rewind a little bit, the first reach out to a school, is there a opportune time of year when families should be reaching out to schools for the first time?
More and more schools are now doing spring outreach events. So the admission season for the following year really actually starts, as early as April, after we've finished wrapping up one series. So that's actually a great time to visit schools if you're in that cycle. For parents who are in that cycle who are not looking for a school until the following year, you can start doing spring tours, and just that can help you narrow your list. But I think most of us take applications beginning at the end of the summer. So I'd say keep your eyes peeled starting, like late July, early August. So we are taking applications actively right now, for example, and we will do so until right around the first week of December.
I've always kind of looked at it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
As soon as you know, let the school know that you're interested. Yeah. Is there any harm in that?
No harm at all. And, it doesn't hurt to, most schools will post it on their website now accepting applications. It doesn't hurt to do that, to look there. But even if you've missed the window, let's say you didn't realize, I didn't realize that I had to put in a whole application. It does take it's not immediate. It's not like you put in an application and you will immediately get a decision the following week. It doesn't quite work like that because it does take time to gather those materials. Call the school. So let's say it's February and you didn't realize that you needed to start looking for your child's school next year in September. Call the school and say, hey, are you still accepting applications? And see what they say. Because if there's space in the grade or if they anticipate some space, they may actually go ahead and take the application and process it as it comes along. So just be a little bit out of cycle, but it's fine.
One comment on a few questions we've got here, not necessarily a direct question for you, Janet, but we had a few people asking about questions regarding applying to schools in Canada. I just want to kind of acknowledge your questions and let you know that most everything that Janet is giving for advice here is applicable to schools in Canada. The one thing that you folks will want to be aware of is oftentimes the application deadlines are much sooner. And for some schools, even in November. So you may have some deadlines coming up quick. So just be aware of that and make sure, I think for everyone with all schools you're applying to, and you said this in your intro, just make sure you understand what their deadline dates are. When you guys are evaluating candidates, what are you looking for in terms of behavior or social skills?
Yeah, that's a great one. And a lot of it depends on the age group, that we're looking at. Ooh, and also because we're a boys' school, we look at all of those things with a different lens as well. So I'm going to have a very particular way of answering that question. When I look at behavioral comments and a teacher recommendation or, insight into kind of when we experienced when the student visited our school, any feedback that, observations that we made during their visit, we're thinking of, who's going to make the most out of their experience at our school. And it's someone who's going to be open to exploring. It's somebody who's going to be open to trying new things, right? People always ask me, what kinds of students are the most successful at your students' school? And I would say that that's one of the traits that really helps. Now, but we're also educators. So a child may come and they may actually be keen, but they don't know how to get started. Then that's our job to help them kind of engage when they join the school, to help them find ways to participate. So that's not really something that is if a student does not exhibit those qualities during the application process, that they are automatically not considered. Do you know what I mean, Darren? Like, basically, I'm just saying that, what are we looking for? We're looking for someone that, that is teachable, right? Somebody that will want to work with their teachers to learn, to deepen their own learning, their understanding, their engagement. We want community members. I've met students before where they were very much laser focused. They wanted one thing. They were like, I want to go to med school. And that's great to have an ambition. I very much applaud that. But I would also want this child to try things like, hey, maybe you'll really like the rocketry club. Like, maybe you'll really enjoy singing in the chorus. And for a student that sees those things as distractions, then you're really not tapping into everything that's available to a student.
Similarly, and you said this in the beginning about the application process being a two-way street. What are some of the things that the families can do to evaluate, whether the school's the right fit for them?
I think it comes back to, family alignment with the values, or the alignment of the school's values with the family's values, right? I think when your child is spending most of their waking hours at school, what are they going to be exposed to? So I think that you want to look and see how the school is talking about those their mission and values. A great way to, when you're on the tour, so many things are happening. You're listening to a tour guide's presentation, and yes, we've trained tour guides. They have a path that they will walk. They have some things, programmatic things that we do want our tour guides to share with families. So there's a lot of detail that you get hit with. So you have to listen, but it's also as important to observe, right? So what are signs up around the school? What signs are up around the school? What message does that send? What clubs are being advertised right now? Ask questions about those. Do people seem friendly? Are people greeting you as you're walking around? Does this feel like a place where, if you have questions about how your child is engaging, or questions about their homework, or that test they just got back, how do you feel received? I think weighing all of those things, that's the unspoken part of the visit, So I think that that's one way to do that. And then I think, like some of the questions, I'm trying to think of some of the best questions I've had from families, and one that I got recently was really about, tell me how this particular value is lived at your school. And it's a value that we talk about a lot. And, it made for a really interesting conversation, but it was very intriguing to me that the parent wanted to know about that particular value. And then it opened up a conversation, like, so tell me why that's so important to you. Right. So then we have a dialogue going.
Thank you. A similar question from a slightly different angle. I found this question really interesting. I hadn't seen this one asked this way before, but what's the best way to ask if we want to know whether our children are suitable for the school?
It doesn't hurt to just be honest and say, hey, listen, here's what I've come to know about my child, A, B, C, and D. Based on those things, can your school support my child in these things that make them special, right? And so I think that that's opening up a conversation there. Another way you can do this, if you don't want to, I think I can see how asking the admission team that question directly may feel like it's very uncomfortable. Ask to talk to a current family. A lot of schools offer, like, say, hey, do you have a family right now that came from the same school that my child is currently attending? And can we be connected with them so we can learn about their experience? I think if you talk to a current family to see if whatever you're particularly seeking for, particularly in that school, that may be a way to get an unvarnished look at that. And then I think, along the lines of, be prepared to be surprised, because no two parents are the same child. So even though you're listening to one parent talk about their experience, your child is still different. Then maybe the school can do something about it, but we won't know what that is if you don't ask us. So kind of talking in circles. Basically, I'm suggesting, talk to us about it, ask it. I can see how it could be challenging, in which case then talk to a kind of family, but also be aware that everybody's a bit different.
So similar along those lines, is it possible to overshare in the interview?
I think that would veer towards, the how memorable a parent is, but again, I think it depends on what that is. What one family considers oversharing is just being honest for another family. And I think it just depends on the circumstances. And now, if you are at a school where you do have a placement person, I think that's somebody that you could talk to ask if that would be okay. You could also talk to your son's current teacher or your child. I say son a lot. Your child's current teacher, and see, hey, I would like to share this information with the admission team. Is that something that you think would be helpful for them to know? And remember, I know what you need to do is to balance. I understand this is tough to kind of consider. You want to balance the best chances of getting your child to the school that you want your child to attend with whether or not that child is the right match for that school is the right match for your child. So that's the balance that you're going to try to be seeking to answer.
All right, I'll take you off the hot seat a little bit. A little less controversially. What is basically an applicant's extracurricular portfolio, whether it be sports or artistic endeavors, community service, scouts, all those other things that kids are doing outside of the classroom? What role does that play in their education?
Yeah. And so this is where I want to also be careful because, if you have a very rich co-curricular life, you do a lot of things outside of school, that gives us a sense as to your interests, but not everybody can do that, right? So not there are many circumstances where, the child may not be playing on a travel soccer team or may not be able to take, extra robotics classes and things of that nature. And there could be very good reason for it. So I don't want to say that that is the be all and end all. It gives us some information but also we don't hold it against kids who maybe don't have that ability to take it on. I know, for example, one of our students, he doesn't have a lot of things going on outside of school. He does a lot of clubs and things at school, but he leaves pretty much right after school and so he doesn't do sports because he has to pick up his younger sister. And I love that. I love that he's caretaking for his younger sister. When he's now a junior, I wouldn't want him to be, dinged for that on the college application side, right? I just want to share that that's a consideration that admissions teams do make. But it does, but it interests now. If your child is interested in things, share that. Hey, we loved hearing about the debate team on our tour. Hey, he loved hearing that he could potentially join the soccer team. That tells us that your student is interested in trying different things, and that's more important than the resume list, if you will.
As a parent, I just want to say thank you. And I'm sure many people on the line are thinking the same thing, for recognizing that there's only so much we can do and our kids can do. It does get a little crazy sometimes with all the activities, especially if you have multiple children.
Correct.
Now, we talked a bit about the child, what you guys do to help students that are introverted coming into the interview. What can parents do to help prepare their children for the interview? And I think, we understand the important thing here is to not overdo it. So where's that fine line?
This is, again, very particular to our school. We have a dress code at our school. And so one way that if you notice that there was a dress code at a particular school you're applying to, maybe ask them, do applicants need to come dressed in the dress code? Now, for Browning, it's no. We want your child to come dressed as is, whether it's what they were wearing to go to school or, what they might be wearing on any regular day. We don't expect that a student who's not enrolled at our school to be in dress code, but your child may feel more comfortable. If your child's not feeling well, call and reschedule. Again, that's another way that you can really help your child set up for success. And as I said earlier, do a little research, help them come up with 2 or 3 questions that they can ask the tour guide or ask their interviewer. I think those are things that when they feel like they're coming in a little bit prepared, they'll have a much more enjoyable visit.
Thank you. We got a lot of questions too from people, just trying to understand, and certainly you're in New York City, so a lot of school options, but a lot of competition as well. Is there a magic number on how many schools they should be applying to?
Mhm.
How should they approach a competitive marketplace?
All right. I don't know that this is a magic number, but I would say that for most families, they're looking between 6 to 8 schools. You also need to weigh that against what your family can reasonably manage, because if there are multiple visits, that's a lot of time that you might have to be giving to those visits and appointments. If you are applying for financial aid, I generally encourage families to add a couple more schools into the mix, just because a lot of it will come down to each school's budget, and you want to have the best chance possible. So I would say if 6 to 8 schools is if you don't apply for financial aid, I'd say for a financial aid family, 8 to 10.
Is it fair for families to ask a school what their acceptance rate is to kind of understand the competitiveness of the school, or is that something as an admission director that you frown upon?
I mean, a family can ask me whatever, and I'll do my best to answer. I don't know, I think then what I always do when I'm speaking with families is I'm trying to discern the question behind the question. So if your question about the acceptance rate is what are the odds, what are the chances of my child getting in? Then ask that, right? Say, hey, how many new students do you typically have for 8th grade, and how many spots do you generally anticipate, and I always say that gives me a chance to say to a family, but the answer is why, but I'm so glad you're here, because if you don't apply, then we would never know if this was going to be something that could work for both of us, and so if we don't meet you, then we don't know. It gives me a chance to reassure them that we want to meet you, and we want to meet your child, and we want to find the right matches between school and family.
We got an interesting question that's sort of in this vein that came in on the live Q&A. Parent asking about, is it true that schools will sometimes ask where else you're applying? And is that something that, can essentially be used against you?
I've seen various responses to this on our kind of our mission directors listserv. I think some schools do inquire what schools you're applying to. For New York City schools, we don't consider that a best practice, because we don't want to put a family in a position where they feel like we're trying to understand, oh, they want this school, then, we're not trying to make those kinds of judgments on a family. So for us in New York City, it's actually not a best practice. If an admission director asks you that question and you feel like that's something that you're not reasonably comfortable answering, I think you can answer it in generic terms. You can say, we're looking at all of his options. We're looking at all available options. We're looking at co-ed. We're looking at single sex. You can say that, or you can say we're looking at a range of schools, from somewhat more traditional to somewhat more progressive schools. Some families will say, you could also say, we are looking at both public and private schools. We just want to see, what might be the best fit.
If I could just add to that a little bit. Schools understand that you're applying to other schools.
Yeah.
Janet just said you might be applying to 7 other competitors of hers. That I wouldn't be too worried about that aspect of it. One good explanation I have heard from others is that it's another way for them to help evaluate, where the family's at and what they're looking for, and whether or not the school is a good fit. So, to use an extreme example, if the school that asked you is a school that specializes in equestrian, but then you're also applying to a school that specializes in the theater arts, that's where the school might say, well, wait a minute, what's your real focus here? What are we really a good match? We're an equestrian school. Why are you also applying to this art school? That's how I've also heard it explained. Janet, am I making sense with that, or is that off base?
Yeah. No, I think that's reasonable. And in fact, I do think that when people have asked that question, there's good reason. They're a very particular type of school, as you just mentioned. But I will also throw in there that there's something that some New York City parents do, which is like a first choice letter. And we explicitly discourage that at Browning. What it is we don't want you to paint yourselves into a corner. So if you send a first choice letter saying that your school is our first choice, if we get in, we will take the spot. I can tell you that many families have changed their minds experience over the years that I've worked in this. So don't lock yourself in. But you could send a letter of interest. You could say, hey, we visited all these schools, and here are all the ways we think your school would be wonderful for my child. That's a letter of interest. That's not the same as a first choice letter. So I think that could be something that if you're really keen on a school, that's one way to express your interest in them.
So you mentioned the reference letters earlier, and that, a personal reference isn't necessarily going to help you. We did get a few people asking how important the reference letter is, but maybe we can expand on that here a little bit and sort of add to that, understanding it's important. Who are the right people to ask to give a reference? Should I be asking teachers? Should I be asking coaches? What are you looking for?
Most schools will require 2 teacher recommendations. And usually they're pretty specific. So at Browning, we want the English teacher and the math teacher to write recommendations. Now, your child may be very close to his science teacher. Then get the science teacher to write a 3rd letter of recommendation. And we use a standardized form for that. So that could be easily used to get an additional reference letter. I would say that the way to weigh it is just, does this person add another dimension of understanding for the admission team about my child that the team's not going to get from his report cards and his teacher recommendations? And sometimes that comes through when your child may not be having the best year with his math teacher or English teacher. Maybe it's not a great personality match. Maybe you feel like they've not yet hit a groove, the right groove. And I don't know if this teacher sees my child and understands who they are. Sometimes it's okay to go to a different teacher, like last year's teacher, and submit a recommendation there. So anything that will help us gain an understanding about your child that isn't already being captured in the teacher recs, would be the way I would go. But I wouldn't do it if the person is too far, too distantly connected. I do want to say, I think private schools, I think folks feel like you have to be connected to get in, and that's not true at all. I think we're really trying to be very much, very mindful, create access, and we believe in our missions, and we want to make that mission and the program that we deliver to be accessible to as many families as we can.
Great. Thank you. I'm cognizant of the clock. We're down to 14 minutes here and so many questions that I want to ask you still.
Yeah.
Let's talk about standardized testing a little bit. You covered this in your introduction. And we get a lot of questions from people asking how important is it? If my child does really good on one section, but not as good on another section, are they doomed because of that? And you kind of broke down a little bit in the intro of how you guys really like to dig in and identify, what a student's strengths are, what their areas of improvement are. It's not, correct me if I'm paraphrasing this wrong, but if I understood you correctly, it's not necessarily a yes or no decision. It's a how can we help them decision. Is that how you're essentially looking at SSATs?
For our school, definitely. And I hazard to guess many of the schools I'm familiar with would say the same thing as well. One thing with respect to the SSAT that I would say, or any standardized test that a school requires, is, I wouldn't say you have to get them tutored, but I would say that they should do a practice so that they're aware of, what the test looks like, what the rhythm, the timing, what each section is trying to investigate, what kinds of questions they may get, how it's scored. Because there is a little bit of that I think you should get your child acclimated to before taking the test. So when I talk to families, I always encourage them, go online and find a practice test and let them give that a try. So most families take it once. Darren, do you have statistics on that? How many times families take it? I'd say no. I'll not encourage a family to take it more than 2 times.
Yeah, the data on that is a little skewed because it's actually under 10%, given all the students worldwide that are taking it, but more than once. But we find that students who take the SSAT, a second time actually do better. The second time around, because as you're saying, there's no better way to practice for the SSAT than to actually take the assessment. And a lot of that is just, the nerves for a student assessment, for many students, it's their first time taking this type of assessment. So, just knowing what to expect, they're going to feel better. They're going to be more confident and they're going to do better that second time around.
Yeah. That's interesting. So about under 10% take it a second time, but people who take it a second time tend to score a little better. That's great data for families, I'd say. And I think that another way that we do use standardized test scores from the admission process is to line it up with how a student is faring at our school after their first year. So that's longitudinal data collection. We want to see, whether how they're lining up. Is our program lining up to what we expected the student can do at our school, and vice versa? So there is some longitudinal data that we do use. A student might have a low score in one of the in the verbal section, and if it's all down to synonyms, if the synonyms is where the student bombed the score, maybe they just haven't learned that word yet. So we tried. That's kind of the conversation we tend to have, and on our end, and that's why we like to look at all of the different parts. But that's a very particular pedagogical approach to looking at test scores. And I don't know that every school does it, but certainly our school, we tend to try to investigate it. So I don't want to say that it's the most important thing of the application. It is not. I don't want to say it is not important, because it is. But so just like every other part of the application process, we if we're going to make you submit it, then we want to look at it and give it the due attention it deserves.
Somebody asked, and I have my answer I'd love to see for this, but I know what the answer is going to be. It's, a lot of people wonder, there's the SSAT and we have a competitor out there.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of schools say they accept both. Do they really accept both? Is there any preference?
They do accept both. There's no preference.
All right. I knew that was the answer, but I just wanted to share that information with everybody. Quickly moving on from that one.
Yeah, sure.
One other question related to testing, a lot of schools have gone test optional. And I think that's almost for families created more confusion in some cases than less, in that, one person asked a really good question. My kid gets really good grades. If we don't submit test scores, is the school going to raise that as a red flag and think, well, why didn't they submit test scores? Grades can be inflated. What is a family to do in a situation like that?
I think this is where the teacher recommendations can really help, because if we try to understand, because how the teacher describes the student's engagement in the classes can actually give a dimension to the grades that maybe the grade itself doesn't quite capture. But I can understand how, if a school says it's test optional and you don't submit it, whether that sends up a flag. I would say just take the school at their word. We are not test optional. I can't comment on why a school might choose that. And I think we went test optional during the pandemic just because we realized that not everybody could get their kid to a test, or like it just wasn't as straightforward for families. So we went test optional, and it caused that anxiety. And that's why we didn't want to do that. We were like, we're going to pick one and stick to it. And in fact, some schools have gone no tests, right? But we're not. We do think that there is still value in the data. It still has value for us, and that's why we have gone back to requiring the test.
Thank you. All right, moving on from standardized tests. One financial aid question a few folks asked, and so I'd really like to get your opinion on this. Earlier when you were saying, average number of schools that families apply to, your number went up when you mentioned financial aid. Does applying for financial aid impact a school's enrollment/acceptance decision?
We have a financial aid budget every year. And so in that budget, we are committed to supporting the families who are already at our school. So we will review those applications annually. And then we also earmark some for particular grades for financial aid. So it does at the very end of the process, some schools may issue a decision, which is a financial aid waitlist decision. So that's where they will let you know, like basically what that communicates is your child's admissible. We just don't have the dollars right now to make an offer. That is not the practice for Browning, or I don't believe for New York City schools, but that is out there. Then you have information. Okay, so my child's admissible. They're just waiting for money. I know we don't do it. I know that a few of our partner schools don't do it as well, because we don't want a family to feel bad that, hey, my child could have gone there if we could have afforded the tuition and we can't. So we don't want a family to feel bad. So sometimes that's just a waitlist decision. But sometimes I will communicate that in other ways to a family that say, hey, we love your child. We love your child. We just need to see how everything shakes up. Cryptically kind of communicate that, hey, your child's wonderful. You're a wonderful family. We're going to try to do everything we can to make it work. So it's not fully need blind at the other end because we do have to work within the school's budget. Admission processes are strive to be equitable. So we do not hold it against a family who is also requiring financial assistance.
Excellent. As we get down towards the end, some international applicants on the line, other than a student visa, is there any other requirements or things that they need to be aware of ahead of time?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to ask the schools that you're applying to. Some schools do ask for TOEFL scores, for example, if your child's current school is not being conducted in English, right? So that may be that's a question I get from international applicants. We don't happen to ask for TOEFL scores, but if this is one of those test optional questions, if they have it, I will take it because it helps us know that, hey, this child can, navigate a school that's functions in English. And so that may be a requirement at a school. You would just have to find out. But I think you would want to let them know in advance that your student will need a student visa because that process, applying for all of that at the other end, it does take some work. So a school that knows that and is prepared for that is better positioned to help your family apply for the student visa.
We kind of covered this earlier in a roundabout way. For students with diverse learning profiles, whether they're autistic or ADHD or, other diverse learning profiles, are there accommodations for them? Do private schools typically accept, students, in those realms? What's your take?
There are independent schools whose mission is to serve students who might have some additional needs. So I would encourage families with a child with needs to look into those schools as well. If you're looking for not a specialized school in that way, if you're looking for a mainstream school, which is I think another way of calling it. I think you can have an open conversation with the school. This is really specific to Browning. Often families will try to send us their child's neuropsych evaluations. We do not take that and accept it as a part of the student's application. So we won't take it at the front end. And a parent will often ask, well, then how do you know if you're going to be able to serve my child? And I said, wait, let the process play out. And if if it works out great and we offer you a place and we admit your child, then come forward with that information, ask to meet with our learning specialists team, ask to see what accommodations we can do. Let that be the way that you choose the school at the end. So there is still a decision window. After you've been admitted to a school, there's a window where you can make a decision. That's a great time to be asking those questions in particular. Because what we want to, again, ensure an equitable process in the front end. So while again, the other balance that you have to strike is to be honest about what your child's needs might be without over sharing, the degree of the neuropsych with us.
Excellent. I think we get time for one last question. A few folks were wondering, is there any benefit to submitting an application before the deadline?
It depends. So some schools, you can't sign up for a tour or interview appointment until you submit an application, a preliminary application. This is true for Browning, because we don't have enough appointments. So you would want to put your preliminary application in, and that's for us is just biographical information, not all the supplementary materials, just the biographical piece, so that you can have choices for appointments, and you're not stuck with a fewer windows to be able to visit the school. So, I think, listen, if we have space in a grade and you call us, very close to the deadline and say, is it too late to submit an application? We'd say, no, please go ahead, and we'd want to accommodate your application as well.
The answer there is there's some benefits to being early in the process, but the student's going to get the same consideration whether they apply on January 14th or November 20th.
Now, Darren, I have done admission for a really long time, and I've done panels like this often, and but I just want to make an observation that I realize that as I'm I sound like I'm talking on both sides of my mouth, when I'm like, it's yes, and it's also this other thing. And I just want to reassure families that when I said it's a two-way street, I really meant it. When I said, there are places where you can find magic and enjoyment in the process, I really meant it. Yeah, there are times when you need to strike the right balance. But I think that's just being human. I think we just go in and we do our best. And that's, it's a very human process is how I would characterize the application process.
Yeah, and for folks, to kind of back you up on that, Jenna, as much as schools are similar, they're all unique as well.
Mm-hmm.
May have different criteria and different things. Even for that last question about, applying early, from Janet's perspective, they have a traditional application deadline. And so no, getting your application in sooner, they're not going to give your child special consideration for that. But on the same token, there's a lot of schools that do rolling admissions where applying on a first come, first served basis actually does factor in, especially if you're applying for financial aid, because they consider applications as they get them. And once the financial aid well is used up, it's used up. So every school is different. And to go back to, Janet's comment at the beginning about having a spreadsheet and making sure you understand what's going on with each school, it really is important to understand each school's policies and guidelines. The first thing you should do is, go to their application procedures page and make sure you get a good understanding of what they're looking for. But that concludes our time. I think we're a little bit over. Janet, thank you immensely for your time today.
My pleasure.
Expertise. This has been super enlightening. And for everybody on the line, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. We just launched a new Q&A section of the website. It's a work in process, but I think a lot of the questions that you're asking, you'll find answers to them there as well. So thank you all for your time today. Good luck in the application process and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Admission Chat podcast. Admission Chat is a production of the Enrollment Management Association. For more EMA resources to help families throughout the private school application process, visit admission.org.